The uncensored reality of the grim crime scenes, where these 10 victims were discovered, is far too graphic to be shown on this platform. But the sheer darkness of their stories remains completely intact. After decades of being buried as forgotten Jane and John Does, the chilling truth of how forensic science finally gave them their stolen names back will haunt you long after the screen goes black. Before she became one of the most famous unidentified dissidents in American history, Marcia King was a vibrant 21-year-old woman navigating the world with her entire life ahead of her. Born and raised in Arkansas, she grew up within a conventional family structure that valued her presence, yet like many young adults of the late 1970s and early 1980s, she sought independence and eventually began traveling away from home. Her departure from her native state was not intended to be a permanent severing of ties, but as weeks blended into months, the communication between Marcia and her loved ones began to fracture. Back in Arkansas, her mother, Colleen King, endured an agonizing daily reality. Refusing to relocate from the family home or change her telephone number for more than 36 years in the steadfast, heartbreaking belief that her daughter would eventually reach out or walk through the front door. This quiet domestic hope existed in sharp, tragic contrast to a horrific discovery unfolding hundreds of miles away in the Midwestern United States, where an anonymous young woman would capture the attention of national investigators. The transition from a beloved daughter to an unsolved forensic mystery occurred rapidly, leaving a devastating emotional void that would remain unfilled for nearly 4 decades. For the family, the lack of information created a prolonged state of ambiguous loss, a psychological limbo where they could neither fully mourn nor find peace. Law enforcement agencies across multiple states were completely unaware that the missing girl from Arkansas was the exact same individual they were desperately trying to identify in a cold Ohio landscape. Her life, once filled with routine daily interactions, friendships, and future aspirations, was abruptly reduced to a static set of physical descriptions cataloged in a police file. The serene morning of April 26, 1981, was permanently shattered when a local resident walking along Greenlee Road in Newton Township, just outside of Troy, Ohio, looked into a roadside ditch and spotted the motionless body of a young woman. Law enforcement personnel from the Miami County Sheriff's Office arrived swiftly at the rural scene, immediately realizing they were dealing with a brutal homicide rather than an accidental death. The victim was positioned on her right side, exhibiting severe, unmistakable signs of physical violence that included traumatic blunt force injuries to her head and definitive marks indicating she had been manually strangled to death. She possessed absolutely no form of identification, no currency, and no personal effects such as jewelry or a wallet that could provide a clue to her origin or name. What she did possess was a highly distinctive wardrobe that would ultimately define her public persona for the next 37 years, most notably a handmade, Native American-style buckskin poncho jacket adorned with intricate purple and red geometric designs and long leather fringe. Beneath this striking jacket, she wore a brown jersey sweater with distinctive bell sleeves, authentic blue denim jeans, and a pair of unlined deerskin winter boots that showed signs of significant wear. Forensic pathologists estimated her age to be between 18 and 26 years old, her height at approximately 5 feet 5 inches, and her weight at roughly 115 pounds, with long, dark reddish, brown hair braided neatly into pigtails. Because of the iconic Western-style outerwear she wore at the moment of her violent demise, the investigative team and local media officially designated her as the Buckskin Girl, a haunting moniker that would symbolize one of the Midwest's most baffling cold cases. This single, traumatic event instantly mobilized a massive local investigation, transforming a quiet stretch of Ohio farmland into the epicenter of a multi-decade search for truth. In the immediate aftermath of the grim discovery, the Miami County Sheriff's Office launched an exhaustive investigative campaign, fingerprinting the decedent and distributing her detailed dental records to hundreds of law enforcement jurisdictions and missing persons bureaus across the United States and Canada. Detectives aggressively pursued the theory that the buckskin girl may have been a runaway or a hitchhiker, focusing heavy attention on the nearby Interstate 75 corridor, a major transportation artery frequently utilized by long-haul truck drivers. Over the successive decades, thousands of leads were meticulously investigated. Numerous potential identities were systematically ruled out through formal comparison of dental radiographs, and psychological profiles of the unknown killer were continually updated. As the years turned into decades and the original investigators retired, the case transitioned into the modern era of forensics, prompting scientists to utilize cutting-edge technology that did not exist in 1981. In the 2000s, stable isotope analysis was conducted on strands of her hair and the fibers of her clothing, revealing that she had likely spent the final years and months of her life traveling through the northeastern United States or southeastern Canadian provinces. Additional palynological testing evaluated the specific pollen grains trapped within her clothing, suggesting she had recently been in an environment populated by specific vegetation native to regions far outside of Ohio. Despite the accumulation of this highly specific scientific data and the creation of advanced digital facial reconstructions that were widely circulated across early true crime websites and national television programs, the investigation repeatedly hit impenetrable walls, leaving the Buckskin Girls file to remain one of the most frustratingly stagnant mysteries in the annals of American crime. Every promising tip eventually dissolved into a dead end, and public interest began to wane as the memory of the crime faded from the local consciousness. The physical evidence, including the iconic fringe jacket, remained locked in a temperature-controlled storage room, a silent testament to a life violently interrupted. Generations of amateur internet sleuths attempted to cross-reference her features with national missing persons databases, yet no match ever materialized. This prolonged period of investigative stagnation created a prevailing sense of hopelessness among the law enforcement community, who feared that the Buckskin Girl would remain forever nameless, buried beneath a simple stone that read, Jane Doe. The sheer lack of progress emphasized the limitations of traditional police work when confronted with a victim who had been completely severed from her geographic origins. The profound silence surrounding the case was decisively broken in the early months of 2018, when the Miami County Sheriff's Office made the historic decision to collaborate with the DNA Doe Project, an innovative non-profit organization pioneered by genetic genealogists Margaret Press and Colleen Fitzpatrick. Forensic technicians successfully extracted a viable, high-quality DNA profile from blood samples that had been remarkably preserved in a deep freeze since her 1981 autopsy. This genetic data was subsequently uploaded into public, crowdsourced genealogy databases, allowing advanced algorithms to scan millions of profiles in search of matching segments of DNA. Within a matter of days, the genealogists discovered a cluster of distant cousins, which allowed them to painstakingly construct a massive, multi-generational family tree that spans several states. Through hours of meticulous archival research, census analysis, and public records searches, the complex branches of this genetic tree began to converge rapidly upon a specific family line originating in Arkansas. The investigators narrowed their focus down to a single missing individual, who perfectly matched the physical parameters and timeline of the Buckskin Girl, Marcia King. In a highly tense and emotional coordination with local authorities, detectives contacted Marcia's mother, who was still living in the exact same residence, and obtained a familial reference DNA swab. The laboratory analysis delivered an absolute, indisputable statistical match, proving with 100% certainty that the Buckskin Girl was, in fact, Marcia King, instantly solving a 37-year-old mystery and delivering a shocking jolt of reality to a family that had spent decades suspended in agonizing doubt. The definitive identification of Marcia King allowed her family to finally replace the cold, anonymous Jane Doe marker at Riverside Cemetery in Troy, Ohio with a beautiful, personalized headstone bearing her true name and dates of birth and death. Although the monumental task of restoring her name was complete, the resolution of her identity instantly shifted the legal machinery back into an active, aggressive homicide investigation. Detectives are currently utilizing the newly established timeline of Marcia's final weeks in 1981 to re-interview old acquaintances, re-examine regional travel logs, and track down potential suspects who may have interacted with her before she was discarded along Greenlee Road. Her mother was finally granted the bittersweet comfort of knowing exactly where her daughter rested, ending the decades of waiting by the telephone. Even though the individual responsible for the brutal act of violence has still not been brought to justice. The triumph of genetic genealogy in the Marcia King case set a powerful legal and scientific precedent, proving to the global law enforcement community that modern science could pierce through decades of absolute anonymity. This profound success illuminated a path forward for thousands of other cold cases across the nation, demonstrating that no John or Jane Doe was truly beyond the reach of modern identification techniques. The case remains an open wound for Miami County, but the psychological burden carried by the community has been fundamentally altered by the introduction of truth. Today, Marcia King is no longer remembered merely as a collection of articles of clothing found in a ditch, but as a young woman whose memory is fiercely protected by those who loved her. The documentation of her life stands as a reminder of the thousands of unidentified bodies still waiting for their names to be returned. As forensic databases continue to expand globally, the margins for killers to hide behind the anonymity of their victims are shrinking to historic lows. In fact, this exact same revolutionary methodology would soon be called upon to solve an equally baffling, self-inflicted mystery hundreds of miles away in the Pacific Northwest, where an enigmatic young man had deliberately erased his past before checking into a remote Washington state motel under a completely fabricated name. The tragic saga of the young man who would become known to the world as Lyle Stevick began far away from the desolate motel room where his life ultimately reached its conclusion. Before he was a subject of intense global speculation, he was an ordinary individual navigating the complexities of modern existence, possessing a distinct personality, childhood memories, and a family that assumed he was simply living his life elsewhere. Those who knew him during his early years saw a young man who was polite, soft-spoken, and remarkably intelligent, yet someone who harbored a deeply private inner world that he seldom shared with those around him. As he entered adulthood, he began to consciously distance himself from his familiar surroundings, gradually severing the daily social dynamics and structural ties that bind an individual to their community. This deliberate withdrawal was not marked by a sudden, explosive conflict, but rather by a quiet, methodical fading out of view that left his relatives in a state of quiet concern, though they initially assumed he was merely seeking a fresh start in a new geographic location. The reality was far more ominous, as he was systematically preparing to erase his presence from the physical world, ensuring that his impending final act would leave absolutely no paper trail or clues for anyone attempting to track his whereabouts. This profound emotional detachment allowed him to blend seamlessly into the background of a transient society, traveling across state lines without drawing the attention of law enforcement or acquaintances. By the time he arrived in the Pacific Northwest, he had successfully transformed himself into a blank slate, a living enigma who carried no identification, no personal mementos, and no historical context. He was a man running away from his own identity, seeking a specific kind of absolute anonymity that would baffle forensic experts and digital sleuths for nearly 2 decades. The physical manifestation of this tragic isolation occurred on Friday, September 14, 2001, when a slender, dark-haired young man arrived by foot at the Lake Quinault Inn, a modest and isolated motel located in Amanda Park, Washington, right on the edge of the Olympic Peninsula. He approached the front desk clerk and requested a room, filling out the mandatory registration card with the name Lyle Stevick, listing a fictitious home address of 1019 14th Avenue in Meridian, Idaho. The motel staff noted that his demeanor was exceptionally polite, calm, and articulate, speaking English with no discernible foreign accent. Though he appeared deeply exhausted and somewhat somber, he paid for his lodging in advance with crisp cash and explicitly requested room 5, a quiet unit situated at the rear of the property. Over the course of the next 3 days, the guest remained almost entirely inside his room, declining housekeeping services and keeping the curtains tightly drawn against the overcast Washington weather. On Monday, September 17, 2001, after the designated checkout time had passed with no sign of movement from room 5, a motel maid utilized her master key to open the door and was instantly confronted with a horrific scene. The young man was dead, hanging from a sturdy wooden clothes rack inside the small alcove closet, having utilized a leather belt to end his own life. Upon arriving at the scene, Grays Harbor County Sheriff's deputies discovered that the room had been meticulously cleaned and arranged, with a neat stack of cash left on the nightstand alongside a brief, heartbreaking note that simply read, "For the room." The complete absence of luggage, credit cards, wallets, or any clothing tags, which had been carefully cut away from his garments, indicated that this was a highly calculated act of self-effacement designed to ensure he would never be identified. When local authorities ran the name Lyle Stevick through national databases, they quickly discovered it was a complete fabrication, likely inspired by a character named Lyle Stevick from the 1989 novel You Must Remember This by Joyce Carol Oates, a story that prominently featured themes of suicide and familial alienation. The autopsy revealed the decedent was a physically fit Caucasian male, possibly with Native American or Hispanic heritage, aged between 20 and 30 years old, standing approximately 6 feet 2 inches tall, and weighing around 140 pounds. He possessed immaculate dental work with several high-quality fillings, suggesting he came from a background with access to excellent health care, yet his fingers bore calluses consistent with manual labor or playing a stringed instrument. Because the suicide occurred a mere 6 days after the catastrophic events of September 11, 2001, national security agencies briefly investigated whether the mysterious man had any connection to the terrorist attacks. But fingerprints and facial recognition scans yielded absolutely no matches within federal or international criminal databases. As the official police investigation stalled due to the absolute lack of physical evidence, the case of Lyle Stevick was uploaded to the internet, where it rapidly transformed into a massive, unprecedented phenomenon among online true crime communities. For 17 years, thousands of amateur internet sleuths on platforms like Reddit and web sleuths dedicated countless hours to analyzing his post-mortem photographs, mapping out possible bus routes he might have taken to Amanda Park, and debating his country of origin. Dozens of missing persons reports from across the globe were cross-referenced with his unique dental records and physical dimensions. But every single potential lead dissolved into a frustrating dead end. The Grays Harbor County Coroner's Office kept his frozen DNA profile on file, but without a direct comparison sample, the digital world could only speculate about the ghost of Room 5. The multi-year digital stalemate was finally shattered in late 2017 when the Grays Harbor County Sheriff's Office authorized a collaborative effort with the DNA DOE project to apply the cutting-edge science of investigative genetic genealogy to the cold case. Geneticists successfully extracted a high-quality DNA profile from the preserved biological samples and uploaded the data to public genealogical databases, beginning the painstaking process of scanning for familial matches. The genealogical analysis yielded highly complex results, revealing a diverse ancestral background that included significant markers from both North America and Europe, which explained why previous facial reconstructions had been so difficult to categorize. After months of tracking down distant cousins and constructing an intricate web of ancestral lineages, the researchers successfully located a specific family tree residing in the state of California that had reported a young male relative missing around the exact same time frame in 2001. In April 2018, authorities made contact with this family, who provided a reference DNA swab for direct comparison in a secure laboratory environment. The results were conclusive and statistically undeniable, providing an absolute match that instantly restored the true legal name of the young man who had died in Amanda Park 17 years prior. Out of respect for the family's profound shock and their explicit right to privacy under state laws, law enforcement officially announced that Lyle Stevick had been identified, but they chose to permanently withhold his real name and specific hometown from the public record. The announcement brought an immediate end to the sprawling internet investigations, replacing nearly 2 decades of wild conspiracy theories with the quiet, somber reality of a deeply personal family tragedy. The resolution of the Lyle Stevick case proved that even an individual who went to extraordinary, meticulous lengths to erase their identity from the face of the earth could still be pulled back into the light of truth by the undeniable science of genetic genealogy. For the Grays Harbor County community and the motel staff who had lived with the haunting memory of Room 5, the identification provided a profound sense of closure, confirming that the polite stranger was no longer a nameless phantom buried in a numbered grave. The case remains a landmark study in the true crime community, demonstrating the stark contrast between romanticized internet myths and the devastating, dry facts of mental health crisis and familial estrangement. The family was finally given the definitive answers they had lacked for nearly 2 decades, allowing them to privately mourn the son and brother who had vanished without a word into the rainy forests of the Pacific Northwest. While Lyle Stevick deliberately chose to hide his identity in death, his successful identification sent a clear signal to forensic investigators worldwide that the barrier of anonymity was rapidly becoming obsolete. This same incredible technological power would soon be deployed across the country to unravel a far more brutal historical atrocity, shifting the focus from a self-inflicted tragedy in a motel room to a horrific, hidden crime scene in Pennsylvania, where the dismembered remains of a young pregnant teenager had lain anonymous in the soil since the bicentennial winter of 1976. The horrific tragedy of the young girl who would be known for 44 years as Beth Doe began within a tightly knit, traditional immigrant family environment where her sudden disappearance caused an immediate, devastating fracture. Evelyn Cullen was a 15-year-old girl of Puerto Rican descent living in Jersey City, New Jersey in the mid-1970s, navigating the vulnerable transition from early adolescence to young adulthood under highly stressful personal circumstances. To those who knew her in her neighborhood, she was a sweet, relatively quiet teenager, but her life took a dramatic turn when she became pregnant by an older boyfriend, a situation that created immense social and emotional friction within her immediate family unit. In the late months of 1976, Evelyn packed her few belongings and departed her family home in the company of this boyfriend, leading her worried mother and siblings to believe that she was simply relocating to a nearby area to begin her new life as a young mother. When communication abruptly ceased shortly after her departure, her family attempted to locate her, but their efforts were severely hindered by a cruel and deliberate deception. A letter arrived at their home claiming that Evelyn had safely given birth to a healthy boy and was living happily in Connecticut, prompting her relatives to assume she had chosen to sever contact. This manufactured narrative effectively silenced her family's immediate suspicions, preventing them from filing an official missing persons report and leaving them completely unaware that Evelyn had never made it to Connecticut. Instead, her life had been brutally and systematically extinguished just days after she left her home, her identity stripped away entirely as her remains were abandoned in a cold, unfamiliar landscape. The shocking physical reality of Evelyn's fate came to light on the freezing afternoon of December 20, 1976, when a teenage boy walking through a desolate area near the Lehigh River in Carbon County, Pennsylvania, made a gruesome discovery beneath an Interstate 80 bridge. Sprawled near the bank of the river were 3 plastic garbage bags containing the dismembered remains of a young female, which had been thrown from the Highway Bridge 70, 5 feet above, and had ruptured upon impact with the frozen ground. Pennsylvania State Police troopers and forensic investigators arrived at the grim scene, immediately recognizing the unparalleled brutality of the crime, as the perpetrator had severed the victim's head, nose, ears, and limbs in a deliberate attempt to hinder identification and prevent a successful autopsy. The post-mortem examination revealed a deeply heartbreaking detail that added a layer of profound tragedy to the case. The victim was a full-term pregnant teenager, and her unborn female child had also perished as a direct result of the mother's violent death. The forensic pathologist determined that the young woman had been shot in the back of the head, strangled, and subsequently mutilated with a sharp instrument, with the time of death estimated to be just hours before her discovery. She was described as a white or Hispanic female in her mid to late teens, with dark brown hair, brown eyes, standing approximately 5 feet 4 inches tall, and weighing around 140 pounds due to her pregnancy. Because she carried no identification, clothing, or personal effects, investigators officially logged her into the system as Beth Doe, a name that would come to represent one of Pennsylvania's most notorious and haunting unsolved cold cases. In the decades that followed the horrific discovery, the Pennsylvania State Police launched multiple aggressive investigations, utilizing every available forensic tool of the era to determine the true identities of Beth Doe and her unborn child. Detectives meticulously checked dental records against thousands of missing persons files across the tri-state area, created numerous physical composite drawings, and even exhumed her remains in 1983 to obtain updated skeletal data, yet every potential lead resulted in a frustrating dead end. For 44 years, the case remained a dark fixture in local lore, with generations of investigators inheriting the files, determined to find justice for the young mother and child who lay buried beneath simple, numbered markers in a Carbon County cemetery. The advent of modern forensic technology in the 2000s allowed scientists to conduct isotope analysis on her teeth and bones, which indicated that she was likely born in Western Europe or the southeastern United States before moving to the mid-Atlantic region shortly before her death. Despite this highly specific geographical data, and the eventual creation of advanced 3D digital facial reconstructions that were widely disseminated across early true crime internet forums, Beth Doe's true name remained entirely out of reach, locked away behind the wall of time. The absolute silence from her family, who still believed she was living an independent life in Connecticut due to the fraudulent letter, ensured that no one was actively looking for Evelyn Collin. In connection with the Pennsylvania crime scene, the investigation seemed entirely paralyzed, destined to remain an eternal mystery, as the original witnesses and detectives began to pass away, leaving only the grim physical evidence preserved in state archives. The profound historical silence surrounding the case was decisively shattered in 2020 when Pennsylvania State Police investigators partnered with the advanced labs of Uthram Inc. to apply modern investigative genetic genealogy to the decades-old evidence. Forensic scientists successfully extracted a highly viable DNA profile from the preserved skeletal remains of Beth Doe and uploaded the resulting data to public, crowdsourced genealogical databases to search for familial matches. The sophisticated algorithms quickly identified a significant genetic connection to a user who had uploaded their DNA profile in pursuit of their own family history, leading genealogists directly to a nephew of Evelyn Collin who resided in Texas. This critical breakthrough allowed detectives to contact the Collin family in New Jersey, who were utterly shocked to learn that the aunt they assumed had abandoned them decades ago had actually been the victim of a notorious unsolved homicide in 1976. A direct reference DNA sample provided by Evelyn's surviving sister confirmed the match with absolute scientific certainty, instantly restoring the name Evelyn Collin to the tragic teenager and identifying her unborn child as Evelyn Grace. The restoration of her name immediately shifted the cold case into a high-priority, active homicide investigation, as detectives finally possessed the crucial geographic and social context that had been missing for over 44 years. 2021. The legal culmination of this scientific breakthrough occurred when the Pennsylvania State Police officially arrested 63-year-old Luis Sierra at his residence in Ozone Park, Queens, New York, charging him with 1 count of criminal homicide. Sierra, who was 19 years old at the time of the murder, was the specific boyfriend who had departed New Jersey with Evelyn in 1976 and was the suspected author of the fraudulent letter sent to her family to cover his horrific tracks. The definitive resolution of Evelyn Collin's identity allowed her surviving family members to finally experience a bittersweet sense of closure, ending 45 years of painful deception and allowing them to plan a proper memorial for the sister and daughter they had lost. Although Luis Sierra died in custody in 2023 before he could stand trial for the double homicide, the scientific triumph of the case stands as a monumental achievement in forensic history, proving that no amount of physical destruction or time can truly erase a victim's identity. The case proved to law enforcement agencies globally that genetic genealogy could penetrate even the most calculated, brutal attempts to obscure a crime scene and silence a victim forever. This exact same revolutionary scientific methodology would soon be called upon to cross continental borders and solve a historic, internationally famous mystery in Australia, where the identity of an enigmatic man found dead on an isolated beach during the heights of the Cold War had eluded the world's finest intelligence agencies for nearly 75 years. The profound geopolitical mystery of the unidentified man who would capture the world's imagination as the Somerton Man began decades before his body was discovered. Rooted in the ordinary, working-class fabric of industrial Australia, Carl Webb was born in 1905 in a suburb of Melbourne, Victoria. Growing up as the youngest of 6 children in a standard domestic environment that offered little hint of the historical enigma he would eventually become. As an adult, he trained and worked as an electrical instrument maker, a highly specialized technical trade that required a sharp, analytical mind and a meticulous attention to detail. Beyond his professional life, Webb was a deeply private individual who possessed a strong passion for poetry, specifically the works of Edward Fitzgerald, and spent a significant amount of time writing his own verses, while also harboring a keen interest in horse racing and betting. In 1941, he married Dorothy Robertson, but the union was plagued by severe domestic instability, marked by Webb's increasing psychological volatility, intense bouts of moodiness, and sudden, unexplained disappearances from the Marshall home. By 1947, the relationship had completely collapsed, prompting Dorothy to legally separate from him and relocate to the state of South Australia to escape his erratic behavior. At which point Webb effectively vanished from the sight of his remaining siblings and former associates. He left no forwarding address, ceased all routine bureaucratic interactions, and deliberately severed the social threads that connected him to his old life in Victoria, effectively transforming himself into a ghost. This quiet, personal disintegration occurred against the backdrop of a rapidly changing post-war world, ensuring that when he finally re-emerged in a different state, he was completely uncoupled from any recognizable personal history. The startling public manifestation of Carl Webb's mysterious trajectory occurred on the warm morning of December 1, 1948, when passing individuals on Somerton Beach, just south of Adelaide, South Australia, noticed a well-dressed man slumped motionlessly against a seawall. Police authorities arrived swiftly at the coastal scene, discovering a physically fit, middle-aged Caucasian male who showed absolutely no outward signs of physical trauma or a struggle, appearing as though he had simply passed away peacefully in his sleep. An immediate examination of his person revealed an unprecedented and highly calculated lack of identification. All the manufacturer and laundry labels had been meticulously cut out from his high-quality clothing, and he carried no wallet, no cash, and no identification papers. In his pockets, investigators found a used bus ticket to Somerton, a train ticket to Henley Beach, a manufactured aluminum com, a packet of chewing gum, a box of matches, and a packet of Army Club cigarettes containing more expensive Cansitas brand cigarettes. The subsequent autopsy added a layer of profound forensic confusion, as the pathologist noted that the man's spleen was massively enlarged, his stomach showed severe congestion and hemorrhaging, and his pharynx was deeply injected, highly classic indicators of acute poisoning. However, exhaustive chemical toxicological screenings failed to detect even a single trace of any known poison, leading the medical examiner to conclude that a highly volatile, rapidly decomposing toxic substance must have been utilized to end his life. The complete lack of personal effects and the medical anomaly instantly transformed the deceased stranger into a national sensation, baffling the South Australian police force and fueling intense public speculation regarding his origins. The investigative mystery deepened exponentially in January 1949, when detectives located a brown leather suitcase at the Adelaide railway station that had been checked into the cloakroom just one day prior to the grim discovery on the beach. Inside the suitcase, police found an assortment of clothing with all identification labels removed, except for 3 items that bore the name Keene, or T. Keene, which investigators ultimately determined to be a deceptive false lead designed to misdirect the inquiry. Months later, a microscopic forensic examination of the dead man's trousers revealed a hidden, tightly rolled scrap of paper sewn into the deep lining of his pocket, bearing the typed words "Tamam shud," a Persian phrase meaning ended or finished, torn directly from the final page of a rare edition of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. An intensive nationwide search successfully located the exact copy of the book from which the scrap had been torn, which had been mysteriously tossed into the back seat of an unlocked car parked near Somerton Beach around the time of the death. On the back cover of this recovered book, detectives discovered faint pencil markings consisting of 5 lines of capital letters that appeared to be a highly complex, unbreakable cryptographic cipher, alongside an unlisted telephone number belonging to a local nurse named Jessica Thompson. When questioned by military intelligence and police, Thompson reacted with profound distress upon viewing a plastered death cast of the Somerton man, denying any knowledge of his identity, but admitting she had previously gifted a copy of the Rubaiyat to an army officer named Alf Boxall during World War II. Because Boxall was quickly found alive with his intact copy of the book, international intelligence agencies became heavily involved, operating under the strong suspicion that the Somerton man was a Soviet espionage agent caught in a deadly Cold War counter-intelligence operation. For nearly 74 years, the baffling case of the Somerton man remained one of the world's most frustratingly stagnant cold cases, with generations of global researchers, codebreakers, and amateur internet sleuths failing to crack the cipher or identify the body. The turning point arrived in 2021, when the Attorney General of South Australia granted permission for the formal exhumation of the remains from the West Terrace Cemetery to allow for the extraction of historical DNA. Parallel to the official state efforts, Professor Derek Abbott of the University of Adelaide, collaborating with renowned American forensic genealogist Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick, successfully secured trace amounts of biological material from hairs that had been trapped in the original plaster death cast decades earlier. Using advanced, highly specialized sequencing technology designed to handle severely degraded DNA, the scientific team successfully generated a comprehensive genetic profile and uploaded it to public, crowdsourced genealogical databases. The algorithms performed a massive cross-reference of millions of global profiles, rapidly identifying a distinct cluster of paternal and maternal matches that led researchers directly to a single, extensive family tree rooted in Victoria. By meticulously tracing the historical branches of this tree through census records, electoral rolls, and birth registries, Abbott and Fitzpatrick eliminated all other relatives until only one individual fit the exact timeline, age, and complete lack of post-1948 public records. Carl Webb. On July 26, 2022, the definitive scientific announcement was made to the international community, confirming with absolute statistical certainty that the world-famous Somerton man was, in fact, Carl Webb, completely dismantling decades of elaborate spy theories and fictional espionage narratives. The forensic resolution provided a stark, grounded reality to the legendary myth, revealing that Webb's presence in Adelaide was likely driven by a desperate, failed attempt to locate his estranged wife, Dorothy, who was living in the area under a different name at the time. While the restoration of his true identity solved the primary mystery that had paralyzed Australian authorities for generations, the exact circumstances surrounding his death on Somerton Beach remain an open historical inquiry, as the specific chemical compound utilized to end his life has never been identified. The scientific triumph of the Carl Webb case stood as an extraordinary testament to the power of investigative genetic genealogy, proving that even 3/4 of a century of absolute anonymity could not withstand modern DNA analysis. This monumental breakthrough underscored a universal truth within forensic science, that every unidentified body, no matter how deeply buried in the geopolitical lore of the past, possesses an undeniable biological blueprint that can eventually lead back home. This same relentless pursuit of historical truth would soon be mobilized in the deep south of the United States, shifting the investigative focus from a peaceful Australian beach to a dark, desolate roadside ditch in Texas, where the identity of a brutally murdered young woman had remained frozen in time since the winter of 1980. The agonizing mystery of the teenager who would be known for more than 40 years as the Walker County Jane Doe began in the late autumn of 1980 within a quiet, standard American household where her sudden departure left a permanent scar. Sherry Ann Jarvis was a 14-year-old girl from Stillwater, Minnesota, navigating a tumultuous period of early adolescence that had recently brought her into contact with the local juvenile justice system due to minor habitual truancy. Because of her recent behavioral struggles, she had been placed in a local foster home, a structural disruption that deeply upset her and prompted her to make the impulsive decision to run away from her native state in search of absolute independence. To those who knew her in Minnesota, she was a bright, exceptionally friendly child who possessed a deep love for animals, yet her vulnerability as a young runaway made her an easy target for predators operating along the national highway systems. After slipping away from her designated placement, Sherry managed to travel hundreds of miles south, completely evading law enforcement detection and failing to establish any contact with her frantic family back home. Her loved ones spent decades assuming she had simply started a new life elsewhere, completely unaware that her journey had been violently cut short just weeks after it began. Her sudden transformation from a missed teenager to an unidentified homicide victim occurred in a remote southern landscape, far removed from the familiar streets of her childhood. The horrifying intersection of Sherry's journey with reality occurred on the damp morning of November 1, 1980, when a passing motorist driving along Interstate 45 near Huntsville, Texas, glanced into a grassy area near a truck stop and spotted a body. Texas Department of Public Safety troopers and Walker County Sheriff's deputies arrived at the rural scene, immediately confirming that the young female had been the victim of an exceptionally brutal sexual assault and subsequent murder. The autopsy revealed that the victim had been severely beaten, subjected to intense physical trauma, and ultimately strangled to death, with the forensic pathologist estimating her time of death to be approximately 6 hours prior to her discovery. A highly critical lead emerged when a waitress at a nearby truck stop informed detectives that a young girl matching the victim's exact description had entered the establishment the previous evening, asking for directions to the local prison unit and stating she had traveled from the Rockport area. The decedent carried no identification, currency, or personal effects, but she possessed distinct physical characteristics, including a vertically oriented surgical scar on her right shoulder, well-maintained teeth with no fillings, and painted toenails. She was described as a white female aged between 14 and 20 years old, standing approximately 5 feet 3 inches tall and weighing around 110 pounds, with shoulder-length brown hair. Because of the geographic location of her recovery, she was officially logged into national databases as the Walker County Jane Doe, a name that would haunt Texas law enforcement for the next 41 years. In the immediate aftermath of the grim discovery, the Walker County Sheriff's Office launched a massive, exhaustive investigation, distributed her fingerprints globally, and checked her dental records against thousands of active missing persons files across North America. Detectives aggressively pursued the theory that she may have been an escaped runaway or a victim of a transient serial killer, focusing heavy investigative energy on the heavy truck traffic moving between Houston and Dallas along the Interstate 45 corridor. Over the successive decades, dozens of high-profile suspects were methodically interviewed. Multiple physical composite drawings were circulated through national media outlets, and her body was exhumed in 1999 to obtain updated forensic data, yet every lead eventually dissolved into a dead end. As the years turned into decades, the case file grew into a massive mountain of paperwork, passed down through generations of frustrated Texas Rangers and local detectives who refused to let the unknown teenager be forgotten. The advent of early digital forensics allowed her data to be uploaded to the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, where amateur internet sleuths spent thousands of hours cross-referencing her features with regional missing child reports. Despite this immense collective effort and the creation of highly detailed digital facial reconstructions, Walker County Jane Doe remained entirely anonymous, her true name locked behind a wall of historical silence. The complete lack of geographical context regarding her origin in Minnesota ensured that Texas investigators were looking in entirely the wrong regions of the country. The multi-decade investigative stalemate was decisively broken in 2020, when the Walker County Sheriff's Office authorized a formal collaboration with Othram Inc. to apply the advanced science of investigative genetic genealogy to the cold case. Forensic scientists successfully extracted a highly viable DNA profile from the severely degraded skeletal remains that had been preserved in state archives since her 1999 exhumation. This complex genetic data was subsequently uploaded to public, crowdsourced genealogical databases, allowing sophisticated algorithms to scan millions of global profiles in search of matching segments of DNA. Within a matter of weeks, the researchers located a distinct cluster of familial matches that led them directly to an extensive family tree rooted deeply in the state of Minnesota. By meticulously analyzing historical public records, census data, and birth registries, genealogists narrowed their focus down to a single family that had lost a young daughter to runaway behavior in the autumn of 1980. In early 2021, authorities made contact with this family, who provided a reference DNA swab that yielded an absolute, indisputable statistical match, proving with 100% scientific certainty that Walker County Jane Doe was Sherry Ann Jarvis. The definitive identification of Sherry Ann Jarvis allowed her surviving family members to finally experience a profound, bittersweet sense of closure, ending 41 years of agonizing uncertainty and allowing them to bring her remains back home to Minnesota for a proper burial. Although the monumental task of restoring her name was complete, the resolution of her identity instantly re-energized the case, transforming it back into an active, high-priority homicide investigation. Detectives are currently utilizing the newly established context of Sherry's life in 1980 to trace her exact travel routes, identify the individuals she may have hitchhiked with, and close in on the serial predator responsible for her brutal murder. The scientific triumph of the Sherry Ann Jarvis case stood as a monumental achievement in forensic history, proving that no amount of time or geographic distance could permanently obscure a victim's true identity from modern DNA technology. The case demonstrated to the global law enforcement community that even the most stagnant cold cases could be completely revitalized through the application of genetic genealogy. This exact same revolutionary scientific methodology would soon be deployed in America's Northeast to solve one of the country's oldest and most emotionally devastating cold cases involving a young child, shifting the focus from a Texas highway to a cold urban landscape in Philadelphia, where a tiny boy found inside a cardboard box had been waiting 65 years for his name to be returned. The devastating tragedy of the tiny child who would be known to generations of Americans as the boy in the box began within an environment of absolute systemic neglect, far removed from the safe, nurturing conditions that every infant inherently deserves. Joseph Augustus Zarelli was born on January 13, 1953, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, entering a complicated web of familial instability that would ultimately seal his horrific fate before he even reached his 5th birthday. To the few individuals who briefly caught glimpses of him during his short life, he was a strikingly beautiful child with large, expressive eyes. Yet he was systematically hidden from the broader community, never being enrolled in school, never receiving routine pediatric medical care, and never being registered in any formal civic databases. His existence was characterized by a deliberate pattern of isolation, orchestrated by those responsible for his welfare, which ensured that his presence in the physical world left almost no social footprint or official documentation. As the months progressed, the severe domestic maltreatment he endured escalated to an extreme degree, culminating in a final, catastrophic act of physical violence that his fragile body could not sustain. After his life was brutally extinguished in a private residence, those who had failed to protect him made the calculated, callous decision to discard his body like common refuse, fully confident that the lack of public records would prevent anyone from ever realizing he was missing. This profound betrayal allowed his killers to blend back into the routine of daily life, leaving the child to be discovered in a bleak, winter landscape, completely uncoupled from any recognizable family name. The shocking public revelation of this crime occurred on the freezing afternoon of February 25, 1957, when a young man checking muskrat traps in a rural, wooded section of Susquehanna Road in northeast Philadelphia made a horrifying discovery. Slumped inside a large, discarded cardboard box that had originally held a baby bassinet from the J.C. Penney department store was the nude, emaciated body of a young boy, wrapped tightly in a piece of cheap flannel blanket. Philadelphia Police Department detectives and forensic technicians arrived swiftly at the grim scene, immediately struck by the profound, visible evidence of extreme physical abuse and chronic neglect that marked the child's tiny frame. The autopsy revealed that the victim, who was between 4 and 6 years old, had died as a direct result of multiple blunt force traumas to his head, with his entire body covered in numerous small scars, surgical marks on his ankle, and a distinct L-shaped scar under his chin. His hair had been crudely and hastily chopped off shortly before or after his death, with clumps of hair still adhering to his shoulders, and his fingers and toes were severely wrinkled, indicating he had been submerged in water for a prolonged period around the time of his demise. He was severely malnourished, weighing only 30 pounds, nearly half the normal weight for a child of his estimated age, and showing clear signs of severe post-mortem bruising that suggested he had been severely beaten over a long period. Because he carried absolutely no identifying information, investigators officially logged him into the system as America's unknown child, a haunting designation that would consume the city's police department for more than 6 decades. In the immediate aftermath of the grim discovery, the Philadelphia Police Department launched one of the most massive, emotionally charged investigations in the city's history, fingerprinting the child, taking his footprints, and distributing his post-mortem photograph to thousands of police stations, hospitals, and social work agencies across the nation. Detectives aggressively pursued thousands of leads, hand-checking the birth records of every child born in the Philadelphia area between 1951 and 1954, and distributing 400,000 informational flyers containing his picture with every gas bill mailed to city residents. Over the successive decades, numerous high-profile theories were meticulously investigated, including a prominent lead involving a local foster home, located just miles from the crime scene, and a harrowing 2002 account from a woman known only as Am, who claimed her abusive mother had purchased the boy and subsequently murdered him in a fit of rage. Despite the accumulation of vast amounts of circumstantial evidence and the efforts of the Vidocq Society, an elite organization of forensic experts who adopted the cold case in the 1990s, the investigation repeatedly hit solid brick walls, leaving the file to remain a frustratingly stagnant mystery. The child's body was exhumed in 1998 to extract DNA, but the primitive genetic technology of the era yielded insufficient data, forcing investigators to rebury him under a headstone that simply read, "Heavenly Father, bless this unknown boy." Generations of dedicated homicide detectives retired and passed away with his photograph still sitting on their desks, deeply frustrated by the absolute silence that surrounded the identity of Philadelphia's most famous lost child. The multi-generational scientific stalemate was decisively broken in 2021 when the Philadelphia Police Department, collaborating with world-renowned forensic genealogist Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick, successfully secured permission to exhume the child's remains a second time to utilize cutting-edge genetic sequencing. Forensic scientists applied modern, highly specialized techniques to extract a comprehensive, high-quality DNA profile from the severely degraded skeletal material that had spent decades in the earth. This precise genetic blueprint was subsequently uploaded to public, crowdsourced genealogical databases, allowing advanced algorithms to scan millions of global profiles for matching segments of DNA that could indicate familial connections. Within a matter of days, the genealogists discovered a significant genetic link to a maternal family line originating deeply within West Philadelphia, which allowed them to painstakingly construct a massive family tree spanning several generations. By meticulously examining historical birth certificates, census data, and medical records, investigators narrowed their focus down to a specific biological mother, and subsequent testing of paternal lineages successfully identified his true father. On December 8, 2022, Philadelphia Police Commissioner Danielle Outlaw held a historic, globally televised press conference to officially announce that America's unknown child had finally received his name back: Joseph Augustus Zarelli. The definitive identification of Joseph Augustus Zarelli allowed his true name to be permanently carved into his headstone, providing a profound, bittersweet sense of historical justice to a city that had collectively adopted him as its own son for 65 years. Although the monumental task of restoring his identity was successfully completed, the resolution of his name instantly shifted the focus of the legal machinery back into an active, aggressive homicide investigation. As detectives began tracking down the individuals responsible for his brutal death, investigators are currently utilizing historical archives and family interviews to establish the exact timeline of Joseph's life between 1953 and 1957, focusing heavily on his biological parents, both of whom are now deceased, and searching for any surviving siblings or caretakers who may have first-hand knowledge of the abuse. The scientific triumph of the Joseph Augustus Zarelli case stood as a monumental achievement in the history of forensic science, proving that no amount of time, physical isolation, or concealment could permanently shield a crime from modern genetic genealogy. The case proved to law enforcement agencies worldwide that even the coldest, most legendary mysteries could eventually be brought into the light of truth through relentless scientific dedication. This exact same modern analytical power would soon be utilized in a completely different geographical context to solve a baffling disappearance that had stumped investigators for over 2 decades, shifting the focus from a cold urban landscape in Pennsylvania to a quiet, submerged vehicle in a Florida canal where a missing man had been hiding in plain sight since 1997. The sudden and absolute disappearance of William Mould on a warm autumn night in 1997 began within the conventional, structured routine of a standard professional lifestyle. A quiet 40-year-old mortgage broker living in Lantana, Florida, William was known by his associates and family as a dependable individual who rarely deviated from his established daily patterns. On the evening of November 7, 1997, he attended a local nightclub in Lantana for a casual social gathering, where witnesses noted that he consumed several alcoholic beverages, but did not appear overtly intoxicated or impaired when he chose to leave. Around 9:30 p.m., he placed a brief, perfectly calm telephone call to his live-in girlfriend, explicitly informing her that he was leaving the establishment and would be returning to their shared residence within a short period. This routine domestic update would ultimately serve as his final communication with the outside world, as he walked out to his white 1994 Saturn sedan and drove out into the Florida night. To his family and the local community, he simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind an intact professional career, an apartment filled with his personal belongings, and absolutely no logical explanation for his abrupt absence. The sudden transition from an ordinary citizen driving home to a missing persons mystery created a prolonged state of intense emotional trauma for his loved ones, who were left to speculate wildly about carjacking, foul play, or a deliberate flight from his life. The complete lack of physical evidence or actionable leads initially paralyzed the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, as a massive multi-agency search of local roads, highway corridors, and bodies of water yielded absolutely no trace of William or his vehicle. For 22 years, his file remained a stagnant cold case, categorized as a missing persons investigation with no definitive proof of life or death, while his family endured decades of agonizing ambiguity. The profound silence surrounding his true fate was decisively shattered on the afternoon of August 28, 2019, through an extraordinary and entirely accidental intersection of modern satellite mapping technology and amateur curiosity. A property surveyor and former resident of the Grand Isles housing development in Wellington, Florida, was utilizing Google Earth to view the neighborhood when he noticed a distinct, suspiciously vehicle-shaped anomaly submerged deep within a retention pond located behind a row of residential homes. He immediately contacted a current homeowner in the area, who utilized a personally owned drone equipped with a high-resolution camera to fly over the specific section of the pond, confirming the unmistakable silhouette of a car resting upside down beneath the murky water. The local resident quickly notified the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, transforming a routine afternoon in a quiet suburban neighborhood into the focal point of a massive forensic recovery operation. Law enforcement personnel and specialized dive teams arrived swiftly at the Grand Isles retention pond, immediately securing the perimeter and preparing to extract the heavily calcified, severely degraded vehicle from its watery grave. As the tow truck slowly winched the white Saturn sedan out of the dark water, investigators noted that the exterior of the car was completely covered in a thick layer of prehistoric-looking algae and barnacles, indicating it had been submerged for a significant period. Upon opening the doors of the vehicle, forensic technicians discovered the skeletal remains of a single adult individual trapped within the driver's seat, completely preserved from external disturbance by the vehicle's structural frame. The interior of the car showed significant water damage and silt accumulation, but the skeletal structure remained completely intact, allowing the medical examiner to safely remove the remains for a comprehensive post-mortem evaluation. The vehicle's license plate and vehicle identification number were immediately checked against historical databases, matching perfectly with the long-lost Saturn sedan belonging to William Moult, who had disappeared just miles away more than 2 decades prior. The discovery provided the crucial physical evidence that had eluded the finest detectives in Palm Beach County for 22 years, shifting the case instantly from an open-ended mystery to a definitive forensic recovery. The recovered skeletal remains were transported to the local medical examiner's office, where forensic pathologists and anthropologists utilized dental radiographs and historical medical records to perform a formal comparison. Within a matter of days, the scientific analysis delivered an absolute, indisputable statistical match, proving with 100% certainty that the skeleton inside the submerged car was indeed William Moult. A comprehensive examination of the vehicle's structural damage and the position of the remains led investigators to conclude that William had lost control of his vehicle while driving along the edge of the development, which was actively under construction at the time of his 1997 disappearance. The car had plunged down the steep, unbarricaded bank of the retention pond and flipped over into the water, rapidly filling with fluid and trapping him inside, before any witnesses could observe the accident. Because the neighborhood was only partially built and lacked adequate street lighting or security cameras in 1997, the immediate ripple on the water's surface had vanished long before construction crews returned to the site the following morning. The satellite imagery captured by Google Earth had actually displayed the submerged car clearly for several years, yet millions of casual internet users had scrolled past the image, completely unaware that they were looking at a missing person's final resting place. The definitive identification of William Mould allowed his surviving family members to finally experience a profound, bittersweet sense of closure, ending 22 years of agonizing uncertainty and allowing them to provide him with a proper, dignified burial. The resolution of the case provided a stark, grounded reality to a mystery that had generated numerous urban legends and criminal theories over the decades, proving that his disappearance was the result of a tragic, silent traffic accident rather than an elaborate criminal conspiracy. The case remains a landmark example within the international law enforcement community, demonstrating how modern technological advancements like satellite mapping can accidentally pierce through decades of absolute concealment to reveal the truth. The successful recovery emphasized the critical importance of examining historical missing persons files through the lens of changing topography and modern digital tools, proving that some answers are hiding in plain sight just beneath the surface of our everyday environments. Today, William Moult is no longer a ghost in a police file, but a man whose final journey has been fully documented and brought to a definitive, factual conclusion. This same relentless, objective pursuit of truth would soon be mobilized in a highly controversial criminal case in Texas, shifting the investigative focus from a peaceful suburban retention pond to a desolate stretch of highway where a notorious serial killer's false confessions had successfully obscured the true identity of a young murdered woman since 1979. The long and agonizing journey to restore the identity of the young woman, who would spend 40 years known as Orange Socks, began within a fractured domestic environment in the late 1970s. Deborah Jackson was born in 1956 and raised in Azle, Texas, a small city just outside of Fort Worth, where she grew up within a complex family dynamic that became increasingly difficult to navigate as she entered her 20s. By 1977, seeking to forge her own path and escape the mounting tensions at home, Deborah made the decision to leave her family residence, initially taking a job at a local Ramada Inn and later at a manufacturing plant. To those who interacted with her, she was a hardworking but deeply private young woman who harbored a desire to explore the world beyond her hometown, a restlessness that eventually led her to begin hitchhiking and traveling across the state. As her travels became more transient, the communication between Deborah and her relatives completely broke down, a silence that her family initially interpreted as a deliberate choice to start anew elsewhere. Tragically, this lack of contact prevented her loved ones from realizing that she had fallen prey to a violent predator, leaving them in a state of quiet, multi-decade expectation, always hoping she would eventually walk through the door. This quiet hope was entirely severed from a horrific reality unfolding hundreds of miles away in Williamson County, where her anonymous body would become the center of one of the most convoluted legal scandals in Texas history. The terrifying physical reality of Deborah's fate was exposed on the cold morning of October 31, 1979, when a passing motorist noticed a flash of color in a concrete culvert beneath Interstate 35, just north of Georgetown, Texas. Upon closer inspection, the individual discovered the nude body of a young woman, and local sheriff's deputies were instantly dispatched to the rural highway location. Forensic investigators documented that the victim had been brutally assaulted and manually strangled to death, with the pathologist estimating her time of death to be only a few hours before her discovery, likely sometime during the dark, early morning hours of Halloween. The killer had stripped her of all clothing, jewelry, and identification, leaving absolutely nothing behind to assist authorities, except for a single, highly distinctive detail: a pair of bright orange knit socks that remained on her feet. The post-mortem examination revealed she was a white female between 15 and 30 years old, standing approximately 5 feet 10 inches tall and weighing around 140 pounds, with long, dark brown hair and a small scar on her chin. Because she carried no wallet or personal effects, the media and the Williamson County Sheriff's Office officially designated her as Orange Socks, a stark and haunting moniker that would define her case for the next 4 decades. The investigation into the identity of Orange Socks and the pursuit of her killer took a highly controversial turn in 1982, when a notorious transient named Henry Lee Luke was arrested and began confessing to hundreds of unsolved homicides across the United States. During a series of intense interrogations with the specialized Lucas Task Force, Lucas provided specific details about the murder of Orange Socks, claiming he had picked her up hitchhiking in Oklahoma, sexually assaulted her, and discarded her body in the Williamson County culvert. Despite a glaring lack of physical evidence linking him to the scene, and Texas Department of Public Safety records showing Lucas was actually working in Florida on the day of the murder, he was formally convicted of the crime in 1984 and sentenced to death. The conviction drew widespread condemnation from investigative journalists and legal experts who exposed the fact that law enforcement had inadvertently fed Lucas details of the crime scene, allowing him to clear their books of an unsolved case while the real killer remained completely free. The controversy grew so immense that in 1998, Texas Governor George W. Bush took the unprecedented step of commuting Lucas's death sentence to life in imprisonment, citing deep, systemic doubts regarding the validity of the confession. This massive legal circus effectively paralyzed the true investigation for decades, as the official narrative remained tied to a false confession, ensuring that no active leads were pursued and that orange socks remained buried in a nameless grave in Georgetown. The profound investigative paralysis was decisively broken in 2018 when the Williamson County Sheriff's Office, under renewed leadership, partnered with the DNA Doe Project to bypass the historical errors of the case using investigative genetic genealogy. Forensic technicians successfully extracted a highly viable DNA profile from skeletal samples that had been preserved from an exhumation conducted years prior for modern testing. This complex genetic blueprint was uploaded into public, crowdsourced genealogical databases, allowing advanced algorithms to scan millions of records for matching segments of DNA shared with living relatives. Within a short period, genealogists identified a distinct cluster of matches that led them directly to an extensive family tree originating in the state of Texas. By meticulously analyzing historical census data, birth registries, and public records, researchers narrowed their focus to a branch of the Jackson family that had lost track of a daughter in the late 1970s. In early 2019, detectives contacted a surviving sister of Deborah Jackson, who provided a reference DNA swab that returned an absolute, indisputable statistical match, proving with 100% scientific certainty that orange socks was, in fact, Deborah Jackson. The definitive identification of Deborah Jackson allowed her family to finally replace the anonymous, orange socks marker with a proper headstone bearing her true name, ending 40 years of agonizing systemic uncertainty. Although the monumental task of restoring her identity was complete, the scientific breakthrough instantly dismantled the remnants of the false historical narrative and forced law enforcement to reopen the case as an active, aggressive homicide investigation. Detectives are currently utilizing the newly established timeline of Deborah's life in 1979 to trace her final known movements, interview old acquaintances from her time working in the hospitality sector, and close in on the actual perpetrator, who escaped justice behind the screen of Henry Lee Lucas's confessions. The scientific triumph of the Deborah Jackson case stood as a monumental achievement in forensic history, proving that investigative genetic genealogy could pierce through decades of legal corruption and false confessions to uncover the truth. The case demonstrated to the global law enforcement community that a victim's true identity is the most critical piece of evidence needed to unlock a stalled investigation. This exact same modern analytical power would soon be called upon to solve an equally famous cold case in Kentucky, shifting the focus from a desolate Texas culvert to an isolated woodland area where a young mother's body had been discovered hidden inside a canvas tent bag since 1968. The captivating mystery of the young woman who would spend 30 years known to the public as Tent Girl began within the bustling urban environment of central Ohio in the late 1960s. Barbara Ann Hackman was a 24-year-old mother of 3 young children living in Florissant, Missouri, and later moving around the Midwest due to the highly transient lifestyle of her husband, George Earl Wright, who worked as a carnival laborer. To those who knew her during her youth, Barbara was a striking, lively woman with a distinct sense of style and a deep devotion to her children. Yet her domestic life was marred by severe financial instability and emotional volatility. In the late summer of 1967, following a brief visit to her family in Cincinnati, Ohio, Barbara disappeared from the trailer park where she was residing with her husband, completely severing all communication with her mother and siblings. Because of the transient nature of the carnival circuit and a series of deceptive claims made by her husband, who allegedly told her family that she had simply abandoned him for another man. No official missing persons report was successfully filed with law enforcement at the time. This calculated narrative allowed her sudden absence to be normalized among her relatives, leaving them to spend decades wondering where she had gone, completely unaware that she had been brutally murdered shortly after her departure. Her life, once filled with the chaotic energy of raising young children, was abruptly reduced to a silent cold case file locked away in a different state. The stark and gruesome physical reality of Barbara's fate was uncovered on the afternoon of May 17, 1968, when a man named Wilbur Riddle, who was searching for glass telephone insulators along a highway, made a shocking discovery in a wooded area off U.S. Route 25 near Georgetown, Kentucky. Wrapped tightly inside a heavy, green canvas tent wrapper was the decomposing, skeletal body of a young woman who had been discarded in the brush like common refuse. Kentucky State Police troopers and local coroner officials arrived swiftly at the rural scene, immediately classifying the discovery as a homicide due to the highly concealed nature of the remains, though the advanced state of decomposition prevented an immediate determination of the exact cause of death. The post-mortem examination revealed she was a white female between 16 and 25 years old, standing approximately 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighing around 115 pounds, with long, dark brown hair. She possessed a unique dental structure, including several missing teeth and notable overlapping characteristics. But she carried no clothing, identification, or personal effects within the canvas shroud. Because of the highly specific material utilized to conceal her body, the media and local investigators officially designated her as the Tent Girl, a haunting name that would linger in the consciousness of the local community for 3 decades. For 30 years, the investigation into the identity of the Tent Girl remained completely stagnant, with local authorities checking her physical parameters against hundreds of regional missing persons reports to no avail. The definitive turning point in this historic cold case occurred not through traditional police work, but through the relentless, obsessive dedication of a local resident named Todd Matthews, who married the daughter of the man who had originally discovered the body in 1968. Fascinated by the tragic mystery that had consumed his father-in-law's life, Matthews utilized the early days of the commercial internet in the mid-1990s to create one of the web's very first dedicated missing persons websites, featuring digital renderings of the Tent Girl's distinct dental profile and physical features. In late 1997, a woman living in Arkansas named Rosemary Westbrook was browsing the nascent internet, searching for information about her missing sister, Barbara Ann Hackman, who had mysteriously vanished from the Ohio region in 1967. Rosemary noticed an uncanny statistical and physical match between her sister's description and the data posted on Matthews' website, specifically regarding the unique dental alignment and the timeline of the disappearance. This extraordinary digital connection prompted immediate contact between the family Matthews and the Kentucky State Police, instantly shattering 30 years of investigative silence. In order to verify the incredible online lead with absolute scientific certainty, the Scott County Coroner's Office authorized the formal exhumation of the Tent Girl's remains from her anonymous grave in Georgetown, Kentucky, in early 1998. Forensic anthropologists and DNA specialists extracted viable biological material from the skeletal remains and compared it directly with reference DNA samples provided by Barbara's surviving sisters and her eldest daughter. The laboratory analysis delivered an absolute, indisputable genetic match, proving with 100% scientific certainty that the Tent Girl was, in fact, Barbara Ann Hackman Wright. The restoration of her identity solved a multi-decade mystery and provided an immense, bittersweet sense of emotional closure to a family that had spent 30 years suspended in agonizing doubt. The historic success of this case serves as a monumental milestone in true crime history, as it directly inspired Todd Matthews to co-found the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, revolutionized the use of online databases in forensic investigations, and permanently changed how law enforcement collaborates with the public. Following her definitive identification, Barbara's family was finally able to place a new, personalized headstone at her final resting place in the cemetery, which proudly displays her true name alongside her original Tent Girl moniker. Although her identity was successfully recovered, the resolution of her name instantly transformed the case back into an active homicide investigation, with detectives focusing heavy suspicion on her now deceased husband, George Earl Wright, who had died in 1999 without ever being formally charged with the crime. Investigators continue to analyze the historical timeline of the carnival circuit in 1967, seeking to document the exact location where the murder took place and determine if any surviving associates from that era possess critical information regarding the disposal of her body. The scientific and social triumph of the Barbara Ann Hackman case proved to the international forensic community that public engagement and digital databases could successfully pierce through decades of absolute anonymity. This same relentless, objective pursuit of truth would soon be mobilized to solve a deeply heartbreaking mystery in the Deep South. Shifting the investigative focus from the rolling hills of Kentucky to a muddy riverbank in Mississippi, where the body of a tiny toddler had lain nameless since the winter of 1982. The heartbreaking tragedy of the toddler, who would spend nearly 40 years known as Delta Dawn, began within a chaotic, unstable domestic environment that ultimately cost her her life before she could even celebrate her third birthday. Alicia Heinrich was born in November 1980, growing up in the care of her 23-year-old mother, Gwendolyn Clemens, in the state of Missouri. To those who caught glimpses of her during her infancy, Alicia was a beautiful, energetic child with a head of strawberry blonde hair, yet her life was deeply impacted by the volatile personal decisions of the adults around her. In the late autumn of 1982, Gwendolyn made the sudden, impulsive decision to depart from her family home in Kansas City, Missouri, intending to relocate permanently to the state of Florida in the company of an adult male partner. She packed her few personal effects and boarded a vehicle with her young daughter, leading her relatives to believe they were embarking on a routine journey toward a stable future in the South. When weeks passed with no communication from Gwendolyn or Alicia, their family grew increasingly alarmed and formally reported them missing to Missouri authorities. But the lack of centralized national databases at the time severely limited the reach of the inquiry. The family's anxious expectation would transform into a decades-long nightmare, completely unaware that the journey had met a catastrophic, violent end just days after it began, leaving the young child completely separated from her true identity in a remote southern landscape. The devastating physical reality of the situation came to light on the overcast morning of December 5, 1982, when a truck driver traveling along Interstate 10 noticed a splash of fabric floating near the bank of the Pascagoula River in Jackson County, Mississippi. Law enforcement personnel from the Jackson County Sheriff's Department rushed to the scene and recovered the lifeless body of a very young female child from the murky water. The autopsy revealed that the toddler had been alive when she entered the river, with the forensic pathologist determining the official cause of death to be drowning. Though there were no obvious external signs of physical trauma or abuse on her small frame. In a highly distressing twist, an intensive search of the surrounding waterways was initiated because a witness reported seeing an adult woman walking along the Interstate 10 bridge, carrying a small child on the night of December 3, and subsequently hearing a loud splash, leading investigators to fear that the mother had also perished. The deceased child carried absolutely no identification currency or personal effects, wearing only a pink and white checkered shirt, a disposable diaper, and a pair of blue socks. Because of the geographic location of her recovery near the delta of the river, the investigative team and local media officially designated her as Delta Dawn, a poignant name that would symbolize one of Mississippi's most emotionally devastating unsolved cold cases. In the immediate aftermath of the grim discovery, the Jackson County Sheriff's Department launched an exhaustive investigative campaign, distributing her footprints and checking her physical descriptions against thousands of active missing child files across the United States and Canada. Detectives aggressively pursued numerous theories, including the possibility that the child had been abducted or discarded by a transient traveler, focusing heavy attention on the heavy interstate traffic moving between Louisiana and Alabama. Over the successive decades, thousands of leads were meticulously investigated. Multiple physical composite drawings were circulated through national media outlets, and her body was exhumed in 2009 to obtain updated skeletal data. Yet every lead eventually dissolved into a dead end. As the years turned into decades, the case file grew into a massive mountain of paperwork, passed down through generations of frustrated investigators who refused to let the unknown child be forgotten. The advent of early digital forensics allowed her data to be uploaded to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, where amateur internet sleuths spent thousands of hours cross-referencing her features with regional missing child reports. Despite this immense collective effort and the creation of highly detailed digital facial reconstructions, Delta Dawn remained entirely anonymous, her true name locked behind a wall of historical silence. The profound historical silence surrounding the case was decisively broken in 2020 when the Jackson County Sheriff's Department authorized a formal collaboration with Uthram Inc. to apply the advanced science of investigative genetic genealogy to the decades-old evidence. Forensic scientists successfully extracted a highly viable DNA profile from the skeletal remains that had been preserved from her 2009 exhumation. This complex genetic data was subsequently uploaded to public, crowdsourced genealogical databases, allowing sophisticated algorithms to scan millions of global profiles in search of matching segments of DNA. Within a matter of weeks, the researchers located a distinct cluster of familial matches that led them directly to an extensive family tree rooted deeply in the state of Missouri. By meticulously analyzing historical public records, census data, and birth registries, genealogists narrowed their focus down to a single family that had reported a young mother and daughter missing in the winter of 1982. In late 2020, authorities made contact with this family, who provided a reference DNA swab that yielded an absolute, indisputable statistical match, proving with 100% scientific certainty that Delta Dawn was Alicia Heinrich. The definitive identification of Alicia Heinrich allowed her surviving family members to finally replace the anonymous Delta Dawn marker with a proper headstone bearing her true name, ending nearly 40 years of agonizing, systemic uncertainty. Although the monumental task of restoring her identity was complete, the scientific breakthrough instantly shifted the focus of the legal machinery back into an active, aggressive homicide investigation, as detectives began tracking down the individuals responsible for her death. Investigators are currently utilizing historical archives and family interviews to establish the exact timeline of Alicia's final days in 1982, focusing heavy attention on the adult male partner who accompanied Gwendolyn and who returned to Missouri alone after the disappearance. The fate of her mother, Gwendolyn Clemens, remains a critical focus of the active inquiry, as her remains have never been found, and detectives highly suspect she met a similar violent fate and was discarded in the same vast river system. The scientific triumph of the Alicia Heinrich case stood as a monumental achievement in the history of forensic science, proving that no amount of time or concealment could permanently shield a crime from modern genetic genealogy. The case demonstrated to the global law enforcement community that even the coldest, most heartbreaking mysteries involving children could eventually be brought into the light of truth through relentless scientific dedication. The names restored to these 10 individuals have finally broken decades of absolute, agonizing silence, transforming them from cold forensic mysteries back into the human beings they always were. Yet, as the curtain falls on their long journeys home, a chilling and unresolved question lingers over the landscapes where they were found. Who were the monsters that stripped them of their identities in the first place? And how many of them are still walking among us today? Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay vigilant.